My sister betrayed me and married my billionaire fiancé. 7 years later, she thought she had won. She stood in front of me, smiling like life had handed her a trophy. The ring on her finger caught the light too familiar, too expensive, too intentional. She talked about her mansion, her vacations, her perfect marriage, as if every word were meant to remind me of what she stole. I listened. I didn't flinch. I didn't argue. Because what she didn't know was this. I had already survived the worst night of my life. I had already rebuilt myself from the ground up. She leaned closer and whispered, "So, still alone, huh?" That's when I smiled. Not out of weakness, but certainty. I looked her straight in the eye and said the one sentence that froze her in place. "Have you met my husband?" And in that moment, everything she believed about winning began to unravel. 7 years ago, my life looked exactly the way people dream it should. My name is Layla, and back then, I believed I had done everything right. I worked hard, stayed loyal, played fair, and trusted the people I loved, especially my family. I was engaged to Ethan, a self-made billionaire everyone admired. He was confident without being loud, generous without keeping score. When we walked into a room together, people noticed. Not because we tried to impress, but because we fit. Or at least, that's what I thought. My younger sister Megan had always been complicated. We were close growing up, but there was always an edge to it. If I succeeded, she pushed harder. If I was praised, she found a way to redirect the attention. It was never obvious enough to confront, just subtle enough to ignore. So when Ethan proposed, I did what any hopeful sister would do. I made Megan my maid of honor. "She'll be so happy for you," my mother said gently. "This could bring you closer." I wanted to believe that. At first, Megan played the part perfectly. She gushed over the ring, helped with dress ideas, insisted on coming to tastings and fittings. "You deserve everything, Layla," she said more than once, squeezing my hands. "I'm so proud of you." But sometimes, I caught her watching Ethan instead of me. Not openly, not obviously, just long enough to make my stomach tighten. At family dinners, she laughed a little too hard at his jokes, touched his arm when she spoke, asked questions that felt personal. Ethan never pulled away. I told myself I was imagining things. "You're stressed," I said to my reflection one night. "You're about to get married. Of course you're overthinking." But the unease didn't go away. One evening, while we were cleaning up after dinner at my parents' house, my mother quietly asked, "Are you happy, Layla?" I smiled without hesitation. "Of course." She hesitated. "And Ethan? He's good to you?" "Yes," I said, a little too quickly. From the living room, I heard Megan's voice float in. "Ethan, you have amazing taste. Layla's so lucky." He laughed. I know, something about that laugh stuck with me. Still, I brushed it aside. Because love makes you generous with doubt. And because I never imagined that the first real betrayal of my life wouldn't come from a stranger but from the two people I trusted most. At the time, I believed we were building a future. I didn't realize they were already rewriting it behind my back. The changes didn't arrive like a storm. They came like a slow leak, quiet, almost polite. At first, Ethan was just busy. That was the word he used. Busy. Busy with investors. Busy with deadlines. Busy building the future we were supposed to share. He started coming home later than usual, loosening his tie as he walked in, already halfway through an apology. "I didn't even realize how late it got," he'd say. "I'll make it up to you." And I believed him. I wanted to. Our Friday night dinners disappeared one by one. Then our Sunday mornings. Then the small rituals that had once made our relationship feel solid: coffee together, lazy conversations, shared silence. When I tried to talk about it, he brushed it off gently. "Layla, nothing's wrong," he said, smiling like I was asking something unreasonable. "You're just overwhelmed with wedding planning." That answer lodged itself into my chest. Because if I was the problem, then I could fix it. Around that same time, Megan started calling more. Not in an obvious way. Not suspicious. Just often. "Have you picked the flowers yet? Did you decide on the cake? Ethan mentioned you were thinking of changing venues." That last one made me pause. "I didn't tell you that," I said carefully. She laughed. "Relax. Ethan and I talk sometimes. You know how close we've all become. We've all become close." I repeated that sentence to myself later, standing alone in the kitchen, trying to understand why it made my stomach tighten. Then came the perfume. I noticed it one evening while folding Ethan's jacket. I lifted it absent-mindedly, then froze. The scent was strong, sweet, floral, unfamiliar. Not mine. I stood there longer than necessary, breathing it in like it might explain itself. When I asked him about it, he didn't hesitate. "Megan hugged me earlier," he said, barely looking up from his phone. "You know how dramatic she is." That explanation landed too easily. No hesitation, no confusion. I nodded. Right, of course. But later that night, lying in bed beside him, I stared at the ceiling, counting the quiet seconds between his breaths and wondering when I had started doubting my own instincts. A week later, I found the earring. It was wedged between the passenger seat and the console in Ethan's car. Silver, delicate, with a tiny stone I recognized immediately. Megan had worn the exact pair to my engagement party, a gift from our grandmother. I didn't confront him right away. I sat with it in my palm for a long time, feeling foolish for hoping it belonged to someone else. That evening, I held it up between us. "Do you know whose this is?" Ethan glanced at it once. "Oh, that must be Megan's." My chest tightened. "Why would Megan's earring be in your car?" He sighed, as if I were the one making things complicated. "I gave her a ride last week. Her car was in the shop." "You drove Megan?" I asked quietly. He frowned. "Didn't I tell you?" No, he hadn't. I called Megan that night. "Oh, thank God," she laughed. "I've been searching everywhere for that earring. Ethan's such a lifesaver, isn't he?" Their stories matched perfectly. Too perfectly. That night, sleep refused to come. My thoughts looped in circles I couldn't escape. I replayed conversations, searched for cracks, questioned my own memory. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe stress really was making me irrational. I started skipping meals without realizing it. My clothes fit looser. My chest felt tight for reasons I couldn't explain. At our weekly family dinner, my mother watched me more than she ate. "You look tired," she said gently, reaching for my hand. "Are you sleeping?" "I'm fine," I said too quickly. "Just nervous about the wedding." She studied me, then said softly, "Sometimes love makes us generous with excuses." The words landed harder than she probably intended. From the living room, I heard Megan laughing with Ethan. "You're amazing," she told him. "Layla's so lucky to have you." He laughed in response. I stared down at my plate, suddenly unable to swallow. That night, alone in the bathroom, I looked at my reflection, dark circles under my eyes, a tension in my jaw I didn't recognize. If something was wrong, I whispered to myself, you would know, but deep down I already did. I just wasn't ready to admit that the truth forming in front of me might destroy everything I had planned my life around. And I wasn't prepared yet for how brutally that truth was about to reveal itself. 3 weeks before the wedding, Ethan asked if we could postpone the cake tasting. "I've got an unexpected meeting," he said over the phone. "Important investors." I stared at the calendar on my desk. "You've been looking forward to that tasting for months." There was a pause just long enough to register. "Megan can go with you," he added quickly. "She knows my preferences anyway." That sentence sat heavy in my chest. How did my sister know my fiancé's preferences better than I did? I agreed anyway. Because at that point, agreeing felt easier than confronting the questions piling up inside me. The next morning, I woke with a strange clarity. The kind that comes after weeks of denial, when your mind quietly decides it's had enough. I packed Ethan's favorite sandwich for lunch, the one from the deli near my office. I told myself it was a sweet gesture, a reminder of us. But deep down, I think I already knew why I was going there. The security guard at Ethan's building recognized me and waved me through with a smile. "Good afternoon, Miss Carter." I nodded back, my heart pounding as the elevator climbed. On the 12th floor, his assistant looked up from her desk, surprise flashing across her face. "Oh, Layla, we weren't expecting you today." "I know," I said, lifting the lunch bag. "I just brought Ethan something to eat." Her eyes darted toward Ethan's office door, then back to me. "He's in a meeting," she said quickly. He asked not to be disturbed. Something in her tone made my skin prickle. "Is he alone?" I asked. She didn't answer. That was answer enough. I walked past her before she could stop me. I opened the door. And for a split second, my brain refused to process what my eyes were seeing. Ethan was standing too close to Megan. Her hands were on his chest, His head was bent toward hers in a way that was unmistakably intimate. They didn't notice me at first. That was the worst part. The familiarity in their posture, the ease. The comfort told a story longer than any explanation ever could. When the door clicked shut behind me, they froze. Megan turned first. Her expression didn't show guilt. It showed annoyance. "Well," she said calmly, straightening her skirt. "I guess this was going to happen sooner or later." Ethan stepped back like he was distancing himself from a bad business deal. "Layla," he said quickly, "this isn't what it looks like." I laughed once. A short, broken sound that didn't feel like it came from me. "Then explain it," I said. Slowly. Megan crossed her arms. "There's no point pretending," she said. "We didn't plan this. It just happened." "How long?" I asked, my voice steady in a way that surprised me. Ethan looked at Megan. She lifted her chin. "Since the engagement party," she said. "So, what, 5 months? 5 months. While I was picking out invitations. While I was meeting vendors. While I was planning a life with a man who had already chosen someone else. You stood beside me," I said, looking at her. "You held my hand while I tried on dresses." She shrugged. "I didn't want to hurt you." I turned to Ethan. "You let me plan a wedding," I said quietly. "Why?" He sighed, rubbing his temples like I was exhausting him. "I was going to tell you," he said. "I just needed the right moment." "The right moment for what?" I asked. "After the wedding? After the honeymoon?" He didn't answer. The silence screamed louder than any confession. I felt something inside me detach like a cord snapping clean through. "I trusted you," I said. "Both of you." Megan rolled her eyes. "Don't be dramatic, Layla. Things change. People choose differently." I stared at her, seeing her clearly for the first time. "This wasn't fate," I said. "It was a series of choices. Every lie, every secret call, every time you looked me in the eye." Ethan pressed a button on his desk. "Please escort Layla out," he said into the intercom. "She's upset." That was it. That was the moment I understood how completely disposable I had become to him. "I'll leave on my own," I said, turning toward the door. "You deserve each other." In the elevator, my legs finally gave out. I leaned against the wall as the doors slid shut, my breath coming in shallow bursts. By the time I reached my car, I could barely see through the tears. I don't remember the drive home. I remember sitting on my bathroom floor, phone pressed to my ear, trying to speak through sobs that wouldn't let me form words. My parents arrived within the hour. My mother held me while I told them everything. My father paced the room, his jaw clenched so tight I thought it might break. "I trusted him," he said over and over. "I trusted him with my daughter." The days that followed blurred together. Vendors were called, deposits lost, dreams dismantled one phone call at a time. When I returned the engagement ring to Ethan's building, I left it with the doorman. I couldn't bear the thought of seeing him again. Megan had already moved in. Her clothes were in the closet that used to hold mine. Family photos were rearranged, my place quietly erased. That was when the truth finally settled into my bones. The betrayal hadn't ended with the affair. It had simply revealed how long I had been standing alone. And as painful as it was, that moment standing in Ethan's office, watching my future dissolve, was also the last moment I would ever beg to be chosen. Because from that point on, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I would never let someone else decide my worth again. The wedding date came and went quietly. No white dress. No vows. No future waiting at the end of the aisle. Just silence. At first, I thought the pain would come in waves, rise, crash, retreat. But it didn't. It settled in me instead, heavy and constant, like gravity had doubled overnight. I went to work every day and stared at my screen without understanding what I was reading. Emails blurred together. Meetings ended without me remembering a single word that had been said. At night, sleep refused to come. When it did, it brought dreams I couldn't escape, rooms full of people smiling at me while everything I loved quietly disappeared behind their backs. Megan didn't reach out. Ethan didn't apologize. They didn't need to. Within weeks, the truth began circulating through our social circle. Some people sent messages filled with sympathy. Others avoided me entirely, as if betrayal were contagious. At a family dinner I barely survived, Megan finally spoke. "He chose me," she said calmly, slicing her food like the conversation was an inconvenience. "You can't blame me for that." My father pushed his chair back so hard it scraped the floor. Enough, my mother said sharply, her voice shaking. This is not how we talk to each other. Megan looked at me, eyes cold. You always had everything first, Layla. The grades, the praise, the life. I just took what I wanted. I stood up, my hands trembling. He wasn't something to take, I said quietly. He was someone I trusted. She shrugged. And now he trusts me. That was the night I stopped attending family gatherings when Megan was present. My mother tried to hold us together. She called me daily, reminding me to eat, to sleep, to breathe. Give it time, she said. You don't have to forgive, just survive. But surviving felt harder every day. I started therapy at her insistence. The therapist called it emotional trauma from prolonged betrayal. She said my body was reacting as if it had been under threat for months. You didn't just lose a fiancé, she told me gently. You lost your sense of safety. That sentence cracked something open inside me. Because it was true. Home didn't feel safe anymore. Family didn't feel safe. Even my own thoughts felt unreliable. Then came the meeting that changed everything. My supervisor closed the door gently and said, Layla, you're one of our strongest people. But right now, you're not okay. I nodded, tears burning behind my eyes. There's an opening in our Chicago office, she continued. It's a step up. New environment, new start. The word start echoed. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, surrounded by boxes of wedding decorations I hadn't had the strength to throw away. I picked up one of the invitations, my name printed neatly beside Ethan's. I tore it in half, then into quarters, then into pieces so small I couldn't read it anymore. The decision felt sudden, but it wasn't. I packed in silence. I donated the dress. I boxed the photos. I deleted messages I'd reread too many times, searching for meanings that were never there. On my last night in the city, my mother came over and sat on the floor with me among half-packed boxes. Running away isn't healing, she said softly. I know, I replied, but staying here is breaking me. She pulled me into her arms, and for the first time since everything fell apart, I let myself cry without restraint. Go, she whispered. Build a life that doesn't hurt. I blocked Megan that night. I blocked Ethan too, not out of anger but necessity. When the plane lifted off the runway the next morning, I watched the city shrink beneath me. I didn't feel relief yet, just exhaustion, but somewhere between the clouds, a quiet thought surfaced. For the first time since the betrayal, no one knew me as the woman who was left. I was just Layla, and I didn't know it then, but leaving wasn't the end of my life. It was the moment I stopped letting betrayal define it. Chicago didn't welcome me with warmth. It greeted me with wind that cut through my coat and streets that didn't recognize my face. And somehow, that anonymity felt like mercy. I rented a small apartment near the river, bare walls, borrowed furniture, silence so deep it almost rang in my ears. At night, I ate takeout straight from the container and listened to the hum of traffic below, reminding myself that I had chosen this. Work became my anchor. I arrived early, stayed late, volunteered for projects no one else wanted. Not because I was ambitious, but because focus kept my mind from drifting back to everything I'd lost. Slowly, people began to notice. You're relentless, one colleague said after a long meeting. In a good way, I smiled. Relentless felt better than broken. Outside of work, I kept my world small. Therapy once a week, long walks by the river, phone calls with my mother, careful and controlled, always avoiding Megan's name. Then came the conference in San Francisco. I almost declined the assignment. Crowded rooms still made my chest tighten, but my supervisor insisted. You're ready, she said. Trust yourself. That's where I met Daniel Foster. He sat beside me at a business dinner, quietly attentive, listening more than he spoke. When he did speak, it wasn't to impress, just to understand. You see patterns most people miss, he said after I explained a campaign strategy. That's rare. I shrugged. It comes from paying attention. He smiled. It shows. He asked for my card. I gave it without expectation. The next morning, he emailed me not with flirtation but curiosity. Would you like to continue our conversation over coffee? We kept it professional at first. Emails turned into meetings, meetings into lunches. He never crossed a line, never rushed. That's what made him feel safe. When he finally asked me to dinner, just us, no work, I nearly canceled twice. Halfway through the meal, my hands started shaking. My breath came shallow. The room felt too small. "I'm sorry," I whispered, embarrassed. "I need a minute." Daniel didn't question me. He didn't touch me. He simply said, "We can sit here as long as you need." He spoke calmly, guiding me through my breathing until the panic loosened its grip. He drove me home without expectations. The next day, flowers arrived at my office with a simple note. No pressure, no assumptions. "I hope you're feeling better." That night, I told him everything. Not the dramatic version, the honest one. The betrayal, the loss, the fear that trusting again felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. He listened without interrupting. "Broken trust changes how your nervous system works," he said quietly. "Anyone who cares about you should respect that." We started as friends. Real friends. He learned my triggers. I learned his silences. He never pushed for more than I could give. A year after I moved to Chicago, I hardly recognized myself. I had been promoted. I had friends who knew me only as Layla, not as someone's ex, not as a cautionary tale. And somewhere in the quiet consistency of Daniel's presence, I realized something had shifted. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building something new, something honest, something that didn't require me to shrink, compete, or prove my worth. And for the first time since the betrayal, the future didn't feel like something I had lost. It felt like something I was choosing. The call came on a Tuesday morning, ordinary in every way except the sound of my mother's voice. "Layla," she said softly, "I need you to come home." I didn't ask why. I already knew. She had been sick for months, appointments, tests, careful optimism wrapped around quiet fear. But this time, there was no pretending. "They've run out of options," she said. "I don't have much time." I booked a flight that afternoon. Daniel insisted on coming with me, but I asked him to stay for the first few days. I needed to face this part alone, to say goodbye in my own way. Walking back into my childhood home felt like stepping into a life I had outgrown. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt safe. My mother was smaller than I remembered, frail but still composed. She smiled when she saw me, the same smile she'd worn my entire life. "There you are," she said. "I was worried you'd gotten too important to come back." I laughed through tears. "Never." We spent long afternoons together talking about everything except what was coming. She asked about my work, my apartment, the way Chicago winters tested my resolve. She didn't ask about Megan. But one evening, as I adjusted her pillows, she said quietly, "I wish you and your sister could find peace." I swallowed. "I don't know if I can do that." "You don't have to forgive her," she said. "Just don't let the anger live longer than I do." That night, I cried in my old bedroom until exhaustion took over. A week later, Daniel joined me. He fit into my family in a way that felt natural, helping my father, making my mother laugh, never demanding attention. Then came the conversation I had been dreading. "Your sister is coming," my mother said one morning, her voice firm despite her weakness. "I want you both here." I didn't argue. This wasn't about me anymore. Megan arrived 2 days later. 7 years hadn't softened her confidence. She walked in wearing tailored black, diamonds catching the light, posture perfect. We hugged briefly, polite, careful. "I'm sorry," she said. I couldn't tell if she meant it. Ethan came later. I didn't speak to him. In the days leading up to the funeral, the house filled with relatives, quiet conversations, and unspoken history. On the morning of the service, rain tapped against the windows like a warning. Standing in front of the mirror, I adjusted my black dress and tried to steady my breathing. Daniel stood behind me, resting his hands lightly on my shoulders. "I'm right here," he said. "Whatever happens." At the funeral home, I stayed close to my father. Megan and Ethan arrived together, composed, united, performing grief. Megan leaned toward me during the reception. "I hear Chicago's been good to you," she said. "Career suits you." "It does," I replied simply. She smiled thinly. "Ethan and I just bought another house." I nodded. Then she added, "Some people move on, others just move away." I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt something unexpected. Nothing. No anger, no jealousy. Just clarity. The service hadn't even begun yet, and already, the past was trying to reclaim its power. I didn't know it then, but before the day was over, the illusion Megan had been living inside for 7 years was about to fracture. And this time, I wouldn't need to say a word to make it happen. The service hadn't even started when Megan asked to speak with me privately. "Just a minute," she said, gesturing toward a small side room in the funeral home. "We should clear the air, for Mom." Against my better judgment, I followed her. The room was quiet, dimly lit, with a box of tissues on a small table meant for grief, not confrontation. She closed the door behind us. Up close, I could see the strain beneath her polished exterior, the faint lines around her eyes, the way her fingers twisted the ring on her hand. "You look calm," she said, studying me. I expected more resentment. "I've had years to process," I replied. She exhaled sharply. "Good, then this will be easier." She straightened, her voice lowering. "Ethan and I are doing incredibly well. His company just closed another acquisition. We're renovating our place, adding a guest wing. We're thinking about starting a family." I nodded politely. She smiled, the same smile she'd worn for 7 years. I guess everything worked out the way it was supposed to. There it was, the scoreboard. She leaned closer and whispered, "I got the man, the money, and the life. You walked away." For a moment, I saw my old self, the woman who would have crumbled under those words. But she was gone. I smiled, slow and steady. "Have you met my husband yet?" Megan blinked. "Your what?" I opened the door. Daniel was standing just outside, speaking quietly with my father. He looked up when he saw me and smiled, the kind of smile that made my chest feel anchored. "Daniel," I said, "come meet my sister." He stepped forward, extending his hand. "Daniel Foster," he said warmly. "It's nice to finally meet you." Megan's smile froze. Behind Daniel, Ethan appeared. The moment their eyes met, I saw it happen, the color draining from Ethan's face, his posture stiffening like he'd just walked into the wrong meeting. "Foster," he said hoarsely. Daniel's expression remained calm. "Professional." "Ethan Reynolds," he replied. "It's been a long time." Megan's gaze snapped between them. "You two know each other?" Daniel glanced at me briefly, as if asking permission. I nodded. "We've crossed paths in business," he said evenly. 7 years ago, actually." Ethan swallowed. "You're married," Megan said slowly, turning to me. 2 years, I answered, slipping my hand into Daniel's. "Very happily." Something shifted in the room. Megan forced a laugh. "So what? Lots of people marry well." Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Ethan and I were competitors," he said calmly. "Different approaches, different ethics." Megan frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means," Daniel continued, "that while my firm focused on sustainable growth, Ethan's made riskier decisions." Ethan cut in sharply. "This isn't the time." But it was already too late. A few nearby guests had stopped talking. Whispers spread like electricity. Megan's voice trembled. "Ethan?" He avoided her eyes. Daniel didn't gloat. He didn't smile. "Several of Ethan's ventures have been under review," he said gently. "That information will likely become public soon." Silence. Megan turned to her husband. "Is that true?" Ethan said nothing. That was answer enough. The funeral director stepped in, announcing the service was about to begin. People began taking their seats, murmuring. As we walked back into the main room, Megan lagged behind, her grip on Ethan's arm tightening, not possessive now, but desperate. During the service, my father suddenly clutched his chest, his face tightening with pain. "Dad," I whispered, panic rising. Daniel was already at his side, calling for help. A doctor in attendance examined him and assured us it was stress, not another emergency, but the moment shook everyone. For the first time that day, Megan looked genuinely afraid. After things settled, the service continued. I gave the eulogy. I spoke about my mother's strength, her kindness, her belief that love should protect, not compete. When Megan stood to speak after me, her voice faltered. She stopped, hands shaking. Without thinking, I stepped beside her and placed a hand on her back. "It's okay," I whispered. "Take your time." She looked at me then, not with rivalry, not with triumph, but something closer to grief. Later, at the reception, I noticed Ethan standing alone, staring at his phone, avoiding conversations. Megan sat beside my father, quiet, her earlier confidence gone. As guests began to leave, she approached me once more. You planned this, she said weakly. I shook my head. No. I just lived my life. She looked at Daniel, then back at me. You really are happy, she said. Yes, I replied. I am. That was the moment she understood. She hadn't lost because Daniel was successful. She hadn't lost because Ethan was failing. She had lost because she built her life on taking, while I rebuilt mine on becoming. And no amount of money could change that. The house felt different the morning after the funeral. Quieter, heavier, like it was finally exhaling after holding too much for too long. Daniel left early for a meeting back in Chicago, kissing my forehead before he went. I'll give you space, he said. Call if you need me. I watched his car disappear down the street and felt something settle inside me. Not loneliness, but trust. The kind that doesn't demand constant reassurance. Later that afternoon, I found my father sitting in the garden, staring at my mother's roses. He didn't speak when I sat beside him. We didn't need words. She always believed you'd be okay, he said eventually, even when everything fell apart. I wasn't okay for a long time, I admitted. He nodded. But you are now. That evening, as I was sorting through my mother's belongings, I found her journal tucked into the nightstand. I hadn't known she kept one. Most of the entries were about small things, recipes, family moments, worries she never voiced aloud. But the last pages were about Megan and me. My greatest fear is leaving this world with my daughters still divided, she had written. I pray they learn that love isn't a competition. I was wiping tears from the page when the doorbell rang. It was Megan. She stood on the porch alone. No diamonds, no confidence, just my sister, stripped of her armor. Can I come in? She asked quietly. We sat at the kitchen table in silence for a long time. Then she spoke. I read Mom's journal, she said. She knew. About everything. I nodded. She always did. Megan's voice cracked. I thought winning would make me feel secure. Instead, I've been living in fear. She told me things she'd never admitted before about Ethan's control, the debt hidden behind their lifestyle, the pressure to maintain appearances at any cost. I'm leaving him, she said. I've already spoken to a lawyer. I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel triumph. I felt sadness. Not just for her, but for the years we lost trying to outdo each other instead of standing together. I don't expect forgiveness, Megan said quickly. I just needed you to know the truth. I believe you, I said. But healing doesn't happen overnight. She nodded, tears slipping down her face. I know. When she left, I didn't feel closure. But I felt something close to peace. Back in Chicago, life resumed its quiet rhythm. Daniel and I settled back into our routines, work, dinners, shared laughter. Months later, I found out I was pregnant. I sat on the bathroom floor, hands shaking, laughing and crying at the same time. Daniel held me and whispered, "We'll do this right." Megan and I stayed in cautious contact. She rebuilt her life modestly, honestly. We weren't close, but we weren't enemies either. And that was enough. Now, when I look back, I understand something I couldn't see before. Losing my fiancé felt like the end of my world. But it was actually the end of a version of myself that tolerated less than she deserved. My sister didn't take my life from me. She revealed who didn't belong in it. The real victory wasn't marrying well. It wasn't financial success. It wasn't even being proven right. It was learning that my worth was never something anyone else could steal. And if there's one thing my story taught me, it's this. People who build their lives on betrayal may look like they're winning, but time has a way of exposing weak foundations. I didn't win by taking anything back. I won by walking away and building something better.